The wind came in sharp off Maple Street, sweeping across the patio and rattling the candle flames on every table. Plates clinked. Laughter floated through the air. Expensive wine glasses caught the golden glow of hanging lights. At one table, no one was laughing. Daniel Mercer noticed her the way you notice something wrong in a perfectly framed picture. Everything else moved. Waiters weaving between chairs, couples leaning in close, music humming softly from hidden speakers. But she was still. His daughters were mid-giggle, chocolate milk mustaches bright against their proud smiles. Tonight was supposed to be about them. Student of the Month. A rare celebration Daniel had saved for quietly. Then he saw her clearly. Celeste Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies. The woman whose calm voice could silence an entire boardroom. Mascara shimmered faintly under her eyes. Her steak sat untouched, steam long gone. And she was alone. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen her command million-dollar negotiations without blinking. But this wasn't command. This was someone trying not to fall apart in public. Before he could react, 7-year-old Lily slipped from her seat. She walked across polished stone like she belonged there. "Excuse me," Lily said softly, her small voice cutting through the patio noise. "My daddy says crying alone makes it worse." Chairs shifted. Conversations paused. Daniel stood so quickly his napkin hit the ground, and Celeste Whitmore lifted her eyes, locking onto his, as if the entire night had just changed direction. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Daniel Mercer never imagined that by 35 he would be both mother and father, teacher and protector, paycheck and bedtime story. 3 years earlier, a hospital room had changed everything. Hannah's laughter, once the loudest sound in their house, faded into silence that still echoed through the walls. Since then, Daniel's life had been measured in routines, not because he loved structure, but because structure kept his daughters steady. Lily, with her gentle eyes and habit of noticing who felt left out, carried Hannah's softness. She asked questions adults avoided and believed kindness could fix almost anything. Emma, fierce and quick to defend her sister, carried Hannah's strength. She stood a little taller than other children her age, as if guarding their small family from the world. Daniel worked as a senior systems engineer at Whitmore Technologies. On paper, it was stable, respectable, the kind of job that looked secure to outsiders. But Daniel understood something most people didn't. Security is fragile when you are the only adult in the house. His alarm rang at 5 each morning. Before the sun rose over Briar Glen, he was already packing lunches, signing permission slips, braiding Lily's hair with fingers that had once only typed code. He double-checked backpacks like a soldier preparing for inspection. Billy's inhaler always went into the front pocket. Emma's spelling list was reviewed twice. He moved through each day with quiet precision. Every utility bill was calculated. Every grocery trip planned down to the dollar. He tracked expenses in spreadsheets the way other people tracked hobbies, because every paycheck wasn't just income, it was safety. He had turned down multiple overtime projects at work, not because he lacked ambition, but because he refused to miss bedtime stories, refused to miss the way Lily's voice softened when she said goodnight, refused to miss Emma pretending she wasn't afraid of the dark. That choice had cost him visibility at the office. He knew it. Promotions went to people who stayed late. He went home. And sometimes, late at night when the house was finally quiet, the fears crept in. If I lose this job, we lose the house. If we lose the house, Hannah's parents will step in again. They had never said it cruelly. But the doubt had been there. "Are you sure you can handle this alone, Daniel?" He wasn't afraid of working hard. He was afraid of instability. Because instability meant his daughters would feel it. And Daniel had promised himself one thing after Hannah passed. The girls would never feel like their world was falling apart. That dinner on the patio had taken 2 months of quiet saving. No takeout, no extra expenses. A little less heat on colder nights. He didn't tell the girls that part. They had both earned Student of the Month. They deserved celebration. He wanted them to remember pride, to remember laughter under golden lights. Not hospital rooms, not whispered adult conversations. So when Daniel stood up from that patio chair, when his daughter walked toward the most powerful woman in town, he wasn't just worried about embarrassment. He was thinking about mortgage payments, about reputation, about how one misunderstanding at work could ripple into everything he had built so carefully. That was the real weight behind his steady expression. Not fear for himself, fear for them. Celeste Whitmore had a reputation in Briar Glen that felt almost mythic. People called her untouchable. She had taken Whitmore Technologies from a rented office above a hardware store to a glass building that dominated the edge of town. Investors respected her. Competitors feared her. Employees straightened their posture when she walked through a room. She was known for precision, for discipline, for never showing more emotion than necessary. She did not cry in public. That alone made the scene on the patio feel unreal. Her presence at the restaurant had already shifted the atmosphere. 2 tables over, a pair of local investors spoke in lowered voices. Across the patio, a banker pretended not to glance in her direction. Even the wait staff moved with an extra layer of caution. Power followed her everywhere. So when Lily's small voice broke through the noise, Celeste looked up like someone surfacing too quickly from deep water. For a split second, confusion crossed her face. Then recognition. Daniel stepped forward immediately, heart pounding in his ears. "I'm so sorry," he said, keeping his voice respectful but steady. "She didn't mean to intrude." Celeste's gaze settled on him, sharp and assessing. Even with mascara faintly smudged, her presence felt commanding. "Daniel Mercer," she said calmly, "Infrastructure Division." It wasn't a question. She remembered him. Her tone was cool, controlled, the same voice she used in quarterly reviews and board meetings. The power imbalance settled between them like an invisible line on the pavement. Employees did not casually approach Celeste Whitmore, especially not when she was vulnerable. Daniel felt it instantly. The weight of hierarchy, reputation, consequence. There had already been quiet tension inside the company. A cybersecurity audit, rumors of internal discrepancies, increased board oversight, meetings that ran longer than usual, emails marked confidential. Something was happening behind the scenes. Celeste's eyes hardened slightly, defensive reflex kicking in. Vulnerability was dangerous for someone in her position. Public weakness could become rumor by morning. But Lily didn't understand power structures. She gently placed a folded napkin near Celeste's untouched plate, as if offering a gift. "My daddy says, sometimes grown-ups forget they're allowed to ask for help." The sentence didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded honest, simple. It hit harder than Daniel expected. He saw it in Celeste's expression, that tiny, almost invisible crack in composure. Not humiliation, not anger. Exhaustion. The kind that builds slowly when you carry too much responsibility alone. The kind that doesn't show up in boardrooms but follows you home at night. For the first time, Daniel didn't see a CEO. He saw a woman who had been strong for too long without pause. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tablecloth. She inhaled once, steadying herself. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but it sounded practiced. Lily tilted her head. "You don't look fine." A nearby table fell quiet. Conversations softened. Daniel felt protective instinct rise in him, not of himself, but of his daughter. He was aware of how quickly kindness could be misread as overstepping. Yet Celeste didn't snap. She didn't dismiss them. Instead, her gaze lingered on Lily for a second longer than necessary. Something about being addressed without agenda, without fear, without corporate polish. It disarmed her. Daniel understood something in that moment. Celeste Whitmore wasn't cold. She was guarded. And whatever was happening inside Whitmore Technologies, whatever pressure she was under, it was bigger than bad press or routine audits. She wasn't angry at his daughter. She was overwhelmed. And for the first time since he'd known her name, Daniel saw the human cost of being the person everyone else depended on. She wasn't untouchable. She was carrying more than she could say out loud. The following Monday, Whitmore Technologies felt different. Not loud, not chaotic, just tight. Conversations lowered when managers walked by. Email subject lines became vague. Meetings were added without explanation. The word audit floated through hallways like smoke no one could trace back to the fire. An internal data breach investigation had begun, discreet, controlled, and highly confidential. Rumors moved faster than official statements. Some said the breach was external. Others whispered it came from inside. A few suggested someone high up was involved. Daniel didn't engage in speculation. He logged in early, left late, and focused on what he could control. He rebuilt server logs from scratch, cross-referenced timestamps, and rechecked firewall permissions most engineers assumed were fine. He reviewed access trails line by line, patient, methodical, not because anyone was watching, but because integrity for him wasn't performance. It was routine. At home, he might rush through dinner prep or laundry folding. At work, precision was protection. A mistake in his division could ripple through the entire company. Mid-week, during a live client presentation with a regional healthcare network, one of the company's internal authentication systems glitched. The screen froze. The login protocol looped. A senior sales executive started to panic. Murmurs filled the glass-walled conference room. Celeste Whitmore stood at the front of the table, expression unreadable but alert. Daniel was in the back, reviewing support dashboards when the alert flashed. He didn't run. He didn't speak loudly. He simply stepped forward, requested temporary access, and began diagnosing the issue. "It's a verification handshake delay," he said calmly. "The patch update last night didn't sync fully with the backup node. No blame. No defensive tone, just clarity." Within 10 minutes, the system was restored. The presentation resumed. The client never knew how close it had come to failure. Across the room, Celeste watched. She didn't clap. She didn't publicly praise him. But she observed something important. No drama. No ego. No attempt to shift responsibility. Just quiet, competence under pressure. That afternoon, Daniel received a brief internal message from her office. "Report to Executive Conference Room 3 at 4:15. There was no subject line, no context. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Authority always carried weight. When he entered the room, Celeste was alone. No legal team. No department heads. Just her, a tablet on the table, and a window overlooking the parking lot. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. This time her tone lacked its usual steel edge. She asked him direct questions about server redundancies, about undocumented access logs, about minor inconsistencies in the security layer that others might have overlooked. It wasn't an interrogation. It was inquiry. She listened when he answered. Really listened. For the first time, there was no corporate wall between them. No title hovering above her head. She noticed the small photo taped to the corner of his laptop when he opened it. Lily and Emma in mismatched pajamas, grinning at the camera. "You have twins," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes lingered a moment longer than expected. He noticed something, too. The faint slump in her shoulders when she thought he wasn't looking. The exhaustion she masked so well in public settings. Trust didn't appear in a dramatic instant. There was no handshake agreement, no sudden alliance, but something shifted. She no longer saw him as just another engineer in infrastructure, and he no longer saw her as simply the untouchable CEO. In that quiet conference room, under fluorescent lights and corporate silence, a small foundation formed. Respect. Earned. Not granted. The accusation didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived in a sealed email marked confidential. By noon, half the building knew. An anonymous internal report claimed that infrastructure access logs had been altered during the early stages of the data breach. Someone with high-level system clearance had manipulated timestamps. Daniel's name appeared in the preliminary review summary, not labeled guilty, just 3 words that felt just as heavy. Person of interest. He was asked to step away from his workstation while the investigation proceeded. 2 security officers walked him down the hallway, not roughly, not dramatically, but visibly enough that every pair of eyes followed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Chairs turned. Daniel kept his shoulders straight, but heat crept up his neck. The same colleagues who had asked him for help the week before now avoided eye contact. He had done nothing wrong, but in corporate culture, suspicion alone was enough to stain. Through the glass walls of the executive wing, he caught a glimpse of Celeste. Her expression was unreadable. She did not intervene. She did not defend him. Protocol demanded neutrality until evidence was reviewed. He understood that. It didn't make it hurt less. By late afternoon, he was placed on administrative suspension pending deeper forensic analysis. Temporary. Unpaid. Standard procedure, Human Resources assured him. Standard procedure did not pay mortgages. He drove home in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Every red light felt longer. Every worst-case scenario louder. When he walked through the front door, Lily ran to him like she always did. She stopped halfway. "You're home early." Her eyes searched his face the way children do when they sense something is wrong but can't name it yet. "Did someone yell at you?" she asked gently. Daniel forced a small smile. "No, sweetheart, just a short day." Emma wasn't as easily reassured. She watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, protective instinct already rising. That night, after the girls were asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out in front of him. Savings account balance. Monthly expenses. Mortgage due date circled in red ink on the calendar. He called an attorney quietly, speaking in measured tones. "Yes, I understand suspension doesn't mean guilt. Yes, I want to cooperate fully." He hung up and stared at the dark window above the sink. If the board needed someone to blame quickly, someone mid-level, visible in the logs, technically capable, he was an easy target. He thought about Hannah's parents, about the questions they had asked years ago. "Are you sure you can handle this alone?" If he lost this job, stability would crack. Insurance coverage would lapse. Legal stress could reopen custody concerns. He wasn't afraid of hard work. He was afraid of losing safety. The next morning, inside Whitmore Technologies, Celeste Whitmore requested full access to the unfiltered system logs, not the summarized reports, the raw data. She locked herself in her office and began reviewing timestamps manually. Something felt wrong. Daniel's digital fingerprint on the servers showed activity, yes, but not intrusion patterns. His login credentials aligned with repair tasks, emergency patches, restoration commands. He hadn't broken the system. He had been fixing it. She traced the breach path deeper, layer by layer. The anomaly didn't originate from infrastructure. It started from executive-level credentials, accessed remotely, masked under authorized override codes. Her jaw tightened. Only a handful of people had that clearance. Board-level clearance. The pattern pointed upward, much higher than Daniel Mercer. Her pulse steadied, but her mind raced. If she exposed this, it would trigger investor panic. Stock value could drop overnight. Media attention would follow. The board would retaliate. If she stayed silent, Daniel would likely be formally blamed within days. The easier path was obvious. Let the investigation conclude naturally. Allow suspicion to settle where it was already leaning. Protect the company's image. But Lily's voice from the patio echoed in her memory. My daddy says crying alone makes it worse. Celeste stared at the screen. The real breach trail was clear now, and Daniel Mercer's career and his daughter's stability hung in the balance while she decided whether she would protect power or protect truth. The official notice arrived the next morning. Administrative suspension pending full investigation. No projected end date beyond minimum 3 weeks. No salary during review. Daniel read the email twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less final. 3 weeks. His savings would stretch carefully for about 2 months if he cut everything non-essential. No extras. No surprises. No emergencies. But life with 2 children was nothing but small emergencies. That night, he sat at the edge of Emma's bed while she stared at the ceiling. "Are we going to have to move?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's throat tightened. "No," he said gently. "We're not going anywhere." He wanted it to be certainty, not comfort. Across the hallway, Lily padded into the living room and climbed straight into his lap without asking. She rested her head against his chest the way she had the night Hannah passed away. "You always fix things, Daddy," she murmured. He wrapped his arms around her. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like someone who could fix anything. He felt small, not because he lacked skill, because he lacked power. Corporate investigations didn't move based on fairness. They moved based on optics, timelines, liability. He stayed up long after the girls were asleep, drafting contingency plans on a yellow legal pad, freelance contract work in cybersecurity, short-term consulting, selling his second car if he had to. He even looked at remote job listings in other states just in case. The idea of uprooting the girls made his chest ache. For the first time since Hannah's death, the pressure felt almost too heavy. Back then, grief had been sharp but clear. This was slower, uncertain, invisible. He leaned forward at the kitchen table and pressed his palms to his eyes. He couldn't veil them. He just didn't know how to stop this from happening. Across town, in a corner office overlooking the quiet parking lot, Celeste Whitmore stared at evidence she could no longer deny. The breach trail had been cleanly masked, but not perfectly. Executive override credentials, encrypted remote access. The digital signature led directly to one person, her chief operations officer, a man investors trusted, a man the board respected. If she exposed him publicly, the fallout would be immediate. Investor confidence would shake. Stock would drop. Headlines would follow. The company she had built from nothing could fracture under scandal. If she stayed silent, the investigation would likely close within days. Daniel Mercer would become the official explanation, a mid-level engineer with enough access to seem plausible, clean, contained, convenient. She leaned back slowly in her chair. This was the cost of leadership. Protect the company or protect the truth? Lily's voice drifted through her memory again. My daddy says grown-ups forget they're allowed to ask for help. Celeste exhaled slowly. For years, she had carried everything alone. Every decision, every crisis, every pressure from investors and board members who valued numbers over people. But this wasn't about pride. This was about integrity. Silence wasn't strategy. Silence was cowardice. And somewhere in Briar Glen, a single father was sitting at his kitchen table trying to calculate how long his daughter's safety would last. Celeste straightened in her chair. If she wanted to lead honestly, this was the moment that would define it. The email went out just after sunrise. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Executive floor. No exceptions. By mid-morning, the main conference hall at Whitmore Technologies was filled. Department heads stood along the walls. Engineers clustered in uneasy silence. Assistants whispered speculation that stopped the moment Celeste Whitmore stepped to the front. Daniel stood near the back. He hadn't slept much. The suspension badge still felt like a weight in his pocket. Faces around him carried curiosity, doubt, sympathy. He couldn't tell which was worse. Celeste didn't bring a legal team with her. She didn't read from a prepared statement. She stood alone. "This company was built on trust," she began, her voice steady but stripped of its usual corporate polish. "And that trust has been tested." The room stilled completely. She tapped the screen behind her. Digital forensic logs appeared, timestamps, access trails, encryption keys, no vague summaries, no softened language. "The breach was not external," she continued. "It was not a systems failure. It was deliberate internal sabotage." A ripple moved through the crowd. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. Celeste didn't hesitate. She identified the source publicly, her own chief operations officer. Executive-level credentials, unauthorized override commands, remote access patterns masked under strategic updates. The evidence was clean, undeniable. Security personnel stepped forward quietly as she finished. The executive's face drained of color. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He was escorted out under the weight of 100 silent stares. Then Celeste looked toward the back of the room, toward Daniel. "Daniel Mercer's suspension is lifted immediately," she said clearly. The preliminary suspicion directed toward him was incorrect. A breath seemed to release across the entire hall, but she wasn't finished. She stepped away from the podium. "I owe Daniel Mercer an apology." The words landed harder than any accusation had. She didn't rush them. "He was investigated because I chose protocol over instinct. I allowed procedure to outweigh personal judgment. That will not happen again." Her voice did not waver. No defensiveness, no excuses, just accountability. The room was silent in a way Daniel had never experienced before. Not tense, not uncertain, but aware. Public restoration. Public responsibility. His name was no longer whispered. It was cleared. Visibly. Employees who had avoided his eyes now looked at him directly. Some nodded. Some offered small, apologetic smiles. Daniel felt something loosen inside his chest. Not victory. Relief. Celeste continued, outlining immediate structural changes, independent oversight, transparent security audits. She announced she would temporarily step back from certain board powers to allow external review. It cost her authority. It cost her leverage with investors. But it reinforced something stronger: integrity. When the meeting ended, the room slowly emptied. Daniel remained where he stood for a moment, steadying himself. The humiliation from days earlier didn't vanish instantly, but it no longer defined him. Celeste approached him once the crowd thinned. "I should have trusted the patterns sooner," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head gently. "You followed procedure." "I hid behind it," she replied. There was no arrogance left in her posture, only resolve. Daniel didn't feel triumphant. He didn't crave revenge. He thought about Emma asking if they would have to move, about Lily saying he always fixed things. He thought about going home that evening and telling them the truth. Not that he had won, but that he had stood still long enough for the truth to rise, and that sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to lie. The official announcement came 2 days later. Daniel Mercer was being promoted to Director of Systems Integrity. It wasn't framed as compensation. It wasn't labeled as recovery. It was positioned exactly what it was: recognition. His calm response during crisis, his technical precision, his documented repair work during the breach, his consistent record of transparency. The new role placed him directly in charge of long-term oversight systems, independent auditing authority, direct reporting access to executive leadership. But what mattered more than the title were the details written into the contract. Flexible scheduling, remote work guaranteed 3 days a week, protected family leave clauses that could not be quietly removed. It wasn't charity, it was respect. Celeste Whitmore announced a company-wide transparency initiative the same afternoon. Quarterly open forums, independent security reviews, rotating ethics oversight panels. She stood in front of employees again, not to defend herself this time, but to rebuild something steadier than reputation. Trust. It didn't return overnight. It never does. But it started. Daniel packed his laptop carefully at the end of the day. Coworkers stopped by his desk, some awkward, some sincere, offering congratulations. A few admitted they should have spoken up sooner. He accepted it with humility. The real victory wasn't applause. It was stability. He stopped by the grocery store on the way home, buying Lily's favorite cereal and the brand of hot chocolate Emma insisted tasted less watery. Small things, normal things. When he walked through the front door, the house smelled faintly of crayons and laundry detergent. Emma was at the kitchen table finishing homework. Lily was sprawled on the floor with a coloring book. They both looked up instantly. Children always sense the difference in a room before adults do. Daniel set the grocery bags down and knelt, pulling them both into his arms without explanation. He held them a second longer than usual. Emma pulled back first, studying his face. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Daniel smiled softly. He nodded. "Together, we did." Because it was true. Without Lily's fearless kindness on that patio, without her simple sentence cutting through pride and isolation, Celeste might never have paused long enough to question the easier path. Without Emma's quiet strength at home, Daniel might not have stood as steady during suspension. Their compassion had started something bigger than they understood. That evening, Daniel helped with homework and listened to Lily explain why purple should always be part of a rainbow. He folded laundry while Emma debated whether school lunches should legally include dessert. Life felt normal again. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just steady. Across town, Celeste remained late in her office reviewing the new transparency framework. Her world had shifted too, not because of scandal, but because of perspective. Power, she realized, was not about control. It was about responsibility, and sometimes the most important voice in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes it's a 7-year-old girl offering a napkin and reminding you that strength and vulnerability can exist at the same time. Back in their small home in Briar Glen, Daniel tucked his daughters into bed. Stability wasn't guaranteed forever. But tonight, it was real. And that was enough. That night, the house in Briar Glen felt warmer than usual. Not because anything had changed about the walls or the furniture, but because something heavy had finally lifted. Lily and Emma sat cross-legged on Daniel's bed, mismatched pajamas and damp hair from rushed showers. 2 mugs of hot chocolate rested on the nightstand, steam curling gently toward the ceiling. The faint hum of the dishwasher filled the quiet spaces of the house. Safe. That was the word Daniel felt most clearly. Safe. He brushed Lily's hair back from her forehead, the same way Hannah used to. Emma leaned into his shoulder, pretending she wasn't still processing the past few days. "You know something?" Daniel said softly, his voice low in the dim light. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared." Emma tilted her head. "Then what is it?" He smiled faintly. "It's doing the right thing anyway." Lily nodded seriously, as if storing that sentence somewhere important. Across town, in a tall office overlooking dark parking lots and quiet streets, Celeste Whitmore sat alone, but not in the same way she had on that patio. She wasn't crying now. She was thinking about pride, about pressure, about how easily strength can turn into isolation if you refuse to let anyone in. Some walls break because they're forced down. Others break because someone is gentle enough to knock. Daniel stood and switched off the bedroom light. The girls settled under their blankets, breathing steady, world intact. He paused at the doorway, listening. The future would still have challenges, bills, deadlines, unexpected storms. But tonight, the ground beneath his feet felt solid. Not perfect, just steady. And sometimes, for a single dad trying to hold everything together, steady is more than enough. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.